Imagine this. You're a single mother, struggling to raise 5 kids on your own. Life hasn't been easy. You've survived an abusive marriage. You fought to give your children a better life. And now, you finally found a quiet little place to start afresh. A cozy cabin in the woods. It's small, but it's enough. The kids are happy, making friends, settling into a new routine. For the first time in years, you start to feel safe. But you don't know that someone, maybe someone that you see every day, is just watching and waiting. And on the night of April 11th, 1981, your life and the life of your children are about to be shattered forever. And it all happened within the walls of Cabin 28. To understand the horror that took place inside Cabin 28, you first have to understand Sue Sharp. Glenna Sue Sharp was 36 years old, a mother of 5, and a woman who had endured more hardship than most people face in a lifetime. She had grown up in Connecticut, where she met and married James Sharp, a former Navy man. At first, things were good. The couple had 5 children together. John, 15, the oldest, rebellious but protective of his siblings. Then Sheila, 14, a responsible, sweet-natured girl. And next, Tina, 12, a quiet, thoughtful child who just seemed lost in her own world. And next, Rick, 10, and Greg, 5, the youngest boys, energetic and happy-go-lucky. On the outside, they looked like a normal family, but inside their home, things were far from perfect. James Sharp was an angry, violent man. He controlled Sue, belittled her, and even worse, he was physically abusive. For years, Sue endured the abuse, trying to protect her children. But eventually, she made a decision that would change everything. She left. Leaving an abusive relationship is one of the most dangerous moments for a victim. Abusers don't just let go. They punish. And Sue knew this. But she also knew that she had to get out. So in late of 1979 or early 1980, she packed up her kids and left Connecticut behind. It wasn't easy. They had almost nothing. But Sue was determined to start over. Her journey led her to California, where she had a brother living in Quincy, a small town in the remote mountains of Northern California. And in that quiet, isolated town, she found a place that she could afford. Cabin 28, Keddie Resort. Keddie, California. It wasn't exactly a dream destination. It had once been a thriving railroad town, but by 1981, it was struggling. The railroad industry had slowed, and the town was becoming run down. What used to be a charming mountain getaway was now a place where people went when they had nowhere else to go. The Keddie Resort had once been a bustling vacation retreat with cabins nestled in the woods, perfect for families looking for an affordable getaway. But now, in 1981, most of the people living in those cabins weren't tourists. They were single mothers, divorced men, families trying to scrape by. Cabin 28 was small, but for Sue and her kids, it was home. She enrolled her children in the local school, found odd jobs to support them, and tried to create some sense of stability. At first, things seemed to be looking up. Her oldest son, John, he had made a best friend, Dana Wingate, 17, a slightly troubled but good-hearted kid who had recently been in a foster home. The two were inseparable. Her daughter, Sheila, had also started making friends and was blossoming into a responsible, kind teenager. But not everything was good. Sue, a newly single woman, caught the wrong kind of attention. She was attractive and independent, things that certain men in Keddie didn't like, and one of those men was Martin Smart. Martin Smart lived just 2 cabins away from Sue. On the surface, he seemed like a normal guy. He lived with his wife, Marilyn Smart, and his stepson, Justin Smart, who would later be found alive inside cabin 28 after the murders. But Martin was bad news. He was violent, he was controlling, and he was abusive to Marilyn. And just like Sue, Marilyn wanted out. In the months leading up to the murders, Sue had been supporting Marilyn, encouraging her to leave Martin, just like Sue had left her abusive husband. And Martin, he hated that. And then things got even stranger. Just weeks before the murders, Martin started acting more aggressive towards Sue. According to people who knew them, he would make creepy comments and threaten her. Sue ignored him. She had no idea that in just a few weeks, he would become one of the prime suspects in the brutal slaughter of her family. It's April 11th, 1981, in the quiet, secluded town of Keddie, California. The sun is beginning to set over the dense pine trees, and darkness is beginning to cast shadows over the small wooden cabins. Inside cabin 28, the Sharp family is settling in for what they think will be just another night. Sue Sharp, the 36-year-old mother of 5, sits in the dim light of the living room. It's been a long day, but she's finally got a few moments of peace. Her youngest boys, Rick, 10, and Greg, 5, are playing in the back bedroom with Justin Smart, 12, a neighbor's kid sleeping over for the night. Her oldest son, John, 15, and his best friend, Dana Wingate, 17, are still out, probably hitchhiking back from Quincy after a long day of hanging out in town. And her 14-year-old daughter, Sheila, is spending the night at a friend's cabin just down the road. She doesn't know it yet, but that decision will save her life. Because by the end of the night, cabin 28 will become a house of horrors. At approximately 10 p.m., Sheila kisses her mom goodnight and heads to her friend's house. Everything is calm. There's no sign of any trouble. By 10:30 p.m., John and Dana are still not home. They had spent most of the afternoon hanging out in Quincy, hitchhiking from place to place, a common thing for teenagers back at that time. They likely grabbed a ride back to Keddie late that night, finally returning to cabin 28 sometime between 10:30 p.m. and 11:30 p.m. And as far as we know, that is when everything started to go horribly wrong. At some point after 11:30 p.m., multiple people entered cabin 28. They weren't burglars. They weren't random drifters. They were there for a reason. And what happened next is one of the most gruesome and baffling crimes in American history. The first victim was Sue Sharp. She was brutalized in ways that showed pure hatred. She was bound with medical and electrical tape, her wrists tied so tightly that the tape cut into her skin. She had been gagged with her own underwear, secured in place with a blue bandana and duct tape. She was stabbed repeatedly in the chest and throat. She had defensive wounds on her hands, meaning that she fought hard. Whoever did this wanted her to suffer. John, her 15-year-old son, was next. He was bludgeoned in the head with a hammer, hard enough to fracture his skull. He was stabbed multiple times in the neck. His best friend, Dana, was murdered in a different way. He was knocked unconscious, possibly with a hammer. And then He was strangled with a cord and left face down on the floor. His body showed signs that he had been beat repeatedly, as if the killers had taken their time. And then there was the 12-year-old Tina Sharp. Unlike the others, her body was nowhere to be found. Instead, there was only a small patch of blood that spelled out Tina on the floor. Now here's the most bizarre part of the whole crime. In one of the bedrooms, just a few feet away from the carnage, were 3 children. Rick Sharp, his little brother Greg Sharp, and Justin Smart, the neighbor's kid. Not only were they completely unharmed, they actually slept through the entire attack, or at least that's what they told the police. But later, Justin's story started to change, and what he would reveal would blow the case wide open. The next morning, April 12, 1981, around 7 a.m., Sheila Sharp walked home from her friend's house, expecting to find her family making breakfast. Instead, when she pushed open the door to cabin 28, she screamed. The living room was covered in blood. Her mother's body lay on the floor near the couch. Her brother John and his friend Dana were lifeless, covered in stab wounds, and Tina was nowhere to be found. Sheila ran screaming to the neighbor's house, and within minutes, police arrived. They knew immediately that something wasn't right. This should have been a simple case to solve. Clear suspects, physical evidence. They were people who knew more than they were saying. And yet, nothing happened. Here's what we do know about how badly this case was mishandled. The crime scene was contaminated, officers letting people walk in and out of the cabin before securing it. They didn't immediately collect blood samples from key areas, and they lost crucial evidence, including a piece of medical tape that was used to bind the victims. The first suspect was Martin Smart. Basically, he confessed, and the police just ignored it. And remember Justin Smart, the boy who slept through the murders? He was Martin Smart's stepson. Martin, his stepfather, was a known abuser with a violent temper, and he lived just 2 cabins away. Just 2 days after the murders, Martin told his therapist something shocking. "I killed those people, but don't tell anyone." And what did the police do? Nothing. A mysterious call about Tina was covered up. A few weeks after the murders, police received an anonymous call. The caller saying, "I just wanted to let you know that you'll find Tina Sharp's body near Feather Falls." And of course, the police never followed up. And when Tina's remains were discovered in 1984, 3 years after the murders, where were they? Feather Falls. It was as if someone had tried to tell them exactly where to look, and yet the case went cold, and the killers walked free. A mother and 2 teenagers were brutally murdered. A 12-year-old girl abducted, only to be found years later, her bones scattered in the woods. 3 young boys left untouched, found sleeping just feet away from the carnage. And the most shocking part? The police had suspects. The police had the evidence. And the police even had a confession. But the case was never solved. Why? Because someone, maybe more than one person, didn't want it to be solved. Somebody knew people. And as we peel back the layers of this case, one thing becomes terrifyingly clear. This was never a mystery. It was a cover-up. From the very beginning, Martin Smart should have been the prime suspect. He lived just 2 cabins away from the Sharp family. His wife, Marilyn, was best friends with Sue Sharp. Sue had been encouraging Marilyn to leave Martin because he was abusive, and Martin hated Sue for that. And then just days after the murders, Martin packed his bags and left town. Suspicious. Absolutely. And what's even more insane is shortly after the murders, Martin met with a therapist, and in that session, he confessed. One of the top suspects in the case literally admits to the murder, and the police do nothing. Absolutely nothing. Instead, Martin left town. He moved to Nevada and then later to Oregon. And no one ever even arrested him or held him. And it gets worse, because Martin was not alone that night. He had a partner, and that man's name was John. John Beau Boubidet. Beau Boubidet was a career criminal from Chicago who had ties to organized crime. And by the time of the Ketty murders, he was staying with Martin Smart. Now, why would a violent ex-con from Chicago be randomly staying in a tiny town like Ketty? Good question. And it's one police never even bothered to answer. But we do know this. Beau was known for violence. Beau had a history of getting away with crimes. And Beau vanished after the murders. From the start, the investigation into the Ketty murders was a disaster, evidence being ignored. A bloody hammer was found in a nearby pond years later, and Tina's skull was discovered in 1984, after an anonymous caller literally told police where to find it. A letter written by Martin Smart basically admitted to the crime, and it was all ignored. Marilyn Smart later claimed that she knew Martin and Beau were involved. She found Tina's jacket in her basement. Her own son, Justin, told police that he had seen something, but he was never pushed for any more information. A neighbor reported hearing muffled screams that night, and yet the case went cold. But there's one more piece to this puzzle, and that's the most infuriating one of all. The sheriff at the time of the murders was Doug Thomas, and Doug Thomas had a personal friendship with, guess who? Martin Smart. The man in charge of investigating the Ketty murders was literally friends with the prime suspect. And here's where it gets even worse. Martin Smart claimed that he even gave police evidence that could have solved the case. The evidence mysteriously disappeared. Doug Thomas left the force not long after the case went cold. Did Doug Thomas cover for Martin Smart? Did he deliberately let him go? We may never know. All we do know is that a man that literally confessed and turned in evidence was allowed to walk free. In 2013, Plumas County Sheriff Greg Hagwood and investigator Mike Gamberg reopened the case, and what they found was chilling. A recorded confession from someone involved in Tina's murder surfaced. A hammer belonging to Martin Smart was found in a local pond, and DNA from the crime scene was matched to a living suspect. For over 40 years, the Ketty murders have remained a mystery. A family and their friend brutally taken, all evidence ignored, a case covered up, and no justice. But with all of the new technology and evidence and new people on the case, will it make a difference? Sadly, both prime suspects have passed away. Will the mystery of what happened that night in Cabin 28 ever be solved? Will the Smarts and their friend get justice? I hope so. Even if it's too late to punish the main murderers, it will still be justice to have their names and the case solved. September 20th, 1988. The New Mexico desert was still. The early morning sun stretched long shadows over Highway 47, its cracked pavement cutting through the endless, barren landscape. And on that lonely road, a pink bicycle moved steadily forward. The girl riding it, Tara Calico, 19 years old, was determined, focused, and completely unaware that she was pedaling straight into a nightmare. Tara wasn't supposed to be riding alone that morning. She and her mother, Patty Dole, had biked this route together for years, but recently something had changed. A few days before, while they were out on their usual ride, a driver had nearly run them off the road. Patty was shaken. She tried to convince Tara to take a different route, to let the dust settle a little. But Tara, she just laughed it off. "Mom, you're overreacting." Patty begged her to carry Mace just in case, but Tara was stubborn. "I'll be fine," she said. "Nothing's going to happen." So that Tuesday morning, when Tara grabbed her Boston cassette tape and borrowed her mother's pink Huffy bike, Patty hesitated. Something felt wrong. Patty had a feeling that she should be riding with her. Instead, Tara slung her Sony Walkman over her shoulder, adjusted her headphones, and turned her back to her mom with a grin. "If I'm not back by noon, come looking for me." It was a joke, just a throwaway comment. So wearing a white First National Bank of Bellin t-shirt, white shorts with green stripes, white and turquoise Avia tennis shoes, and a gold butterfly ring with hoop earrings, Tara spun the wheels of her bike against the pavement. She quickly disappeared into the vast emptiness of Highway 47. By noon, Tara still hadn't made it home, and Patty knows something's wrong. Her daughter is never late. So she does exactly what Tara had told her to do. She drives the entire route looking for her. But there's no sign of Tara, no pink bike, nothing. And then the next day, a more extensive search was done of the highway. Between authorities, family, and community members, when they find something, a cassette tape, a Boston cassette tape, Tara's cassette tape, lying in the dirt, abandoned, right on the side of the road that Tara would have been riding on. Then a little further ahead, they found bike tracks, but not normal ones. The tracks looked like there was a scuffle, like someone had stopped suddenly, like maybe Tara tried to fight back, a definite sign of a struggle. And then, miles away from where she vanished, her Walkman smashed. The pieces scattered near the John F. Kennedy campground, 19 miles east of Highway 47. It's like she had been trying to leave clues, desperately trying to say, "Follow this path, find me." A witness soon came forward. He had saw her that morning, pedaling hard, focused, head down, listening to her Walkman. But he had also saw something else, a light truck, a 1953 Ford F-150, old, beat up, with a shell camper attached. The driver was believed to be in his late 30s, early 40s, and he was described as a white man with red or brown hair. 9 months later, 1,500 miles away, June 15th, 1989, Port St. Joe, Florida. A woman pulls into a grocery store parking lot. She steps out of her car, and something on the ground catches her eye. A Polaroid photograph. She picks it up and screams because staring back at her are two people, a young boy and a teenage girl, both bound and gagged with duct tape. They are lying in the back of a white van on a pile of blankets and pillows. The girl, dark hair, pale skin, and a scar on her right leg, right where Tara had one. Next to her in the photograph, a copy of My Sweet Audrina, Tara's most favorite book. The woman rushes the photo to the police. They set up roadblocks and search for the white van, but they never find it. And the girl in the Polaroid? She is never identified. For years, nothing happens, but in 2008, a bombshell. Valencia County Sheriff Rene Rivera makes a shocking statement. He said he knows what happened to Tara, He claims 2 teenage boys in a truck accidentally hit Tara that day. Panicked, they took her, hid her in their vehicle, and drove her somewhere that no one could ever find her. Rivera stated that he knew the names of those involved, but without a body, he couldn't make a case. On June 13th of 2023, the Valencia County Sheriff's Office announced a breakthrough. At that time, law enforcement officers believed that there was sufficient evidence to submit the investigation to the District Attorney's Office for review. Somewhere out there in the vast, empty desert of New Mexico, Tara Calico's story still lingers. Was she the girl in the Polaroid, held captive long after the world had stopped looking for her? Or is the truth still out there, buried deep inside the minds of peoples who have kept a terrible secret for decades? For decades, Tara's family has waited. They have searched, they have hoped, and they have carried the unbearable weight of not knowing. For years, Tara's case has remained frozen in time, but one thing is for sure. Her mother, Patty, never stopped looking. Patty Dole passed away in 2006. Her last wish, to finally know what happened to her daughter. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Mystery Monday from Tales Told in the Dark. See you next time with 2 new mysteries.